We visited Alan Gross this morning. We have talked with his legal team, and we do firmly believe and truly believe that it is time that both countries commit, mind you, make a serious commitment to engage in negotiations with no preconditions, and we will communicate that to the White House upon our return.
That was California Congresswoman Barbara Lee in Havana this week, or last week, part of a congressional delegation visiting jailed USAID contractor Alan Gross in prison. Gross was sentenced to 15 years after being charged with crimes against the Cuban state for bringing in communication equipment to deliver to Jewish groups as part of a contract with AID. Congresswoman Lee now joins me from Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, thank you very much. Thanks for keeping a spotlight on this. I think you were with Alan Gross during the week when he was turning 63, if I'm correct, his birthday, another birthday in prison. Maybe I have the year wrong, but he was very morose, at least in his public statements communicated through his attorneys. Tell me what you found when you met with him.
Thank you, Andrea, for your voice and keeping this in the public viewpoint, because this is a very important case. I have visited Alan Gross 3 times over the last 4.5 years. And I can tell you one thing, a couple of things. First of all, Alan has lost a lot of weight. But secondly, he's desperate, and he can't hang on much longer in terms of his emotional state. He did turn 65, and he has said, and statements have been made, that he's going home either alive or in a body bag. And I think what's important to recognize that he was doing work for the United States, the USA, our country, and our country has a responsibility to bring him home. Having said that, we have to move forward and insist that there be negotiations with no preconditions. We met with our officials prior to leaving. We also met with Cuban officials to make sure that we heard both sides correctly, and that is they want to negotiate. They've been in conversations, but I don't believe they've been negotiating. Cuban government committed and said to us that they want to talk, they want negotiations with no preconditions, and that is so critical in terms of gaining Alan's release. So we're communicating that back once again to our own country, that we want to see these negotiations with no preconditions, because the time is now to do this. Andrea, we were there with, and I'm very proud and pleased that Congressman Sam Farr from California, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver from Missouri, and Congressman Gregory Meeks from New York, all 3 visited Alan and concluded the same thing, that we had to get this on track, that we need to be the facilitators of negotiations with no preconditions so that we can move forward, make sure that all of those issues that are of concern to Cuba and to the United States are put on the table.
Now, when you say no preconditions, you mean that you don't want the Cubans to be demanding the release of some of their prisoners here, and you don't want the U.S. to be demanding any kind of change in their policy. You want this to be negotiated as a standalone question.
Absolutely. That's the only way that we can resolve this. That's the only way that we can move the ball forward. And so hopefully the United States understands, with 4 members of Congress, once again, talking to the Cubans, talking to our own government, that we do believe that there's been some form of miscommunication. People are having conversations, officials are, but they're not negotiating. And we want to say very clearly that we believe that the Cubans and the United States of America should sit down with no preconditions and talk about all of the issues that will affect the release of Alan Gross.
Now, Congresswoman, you know, this is so hard for people to understand. He's been arrested. They say that he violated Cuban law. There are very serious restrictions over what you can bring in. No one has ever explained to me the rationale behind this AID contract. It preceded the current administrator, so no blame there. But what was he doing in satellite gear into Cuba, which all of us know when we come into Cuba, the restrictions are very real. We all have to show our telephones and show every bit of equipment, and we do. We list everything. We write it all down. What were they doing?
Well, Andrea, I can't go into the legal case. I don't think that needs to be discussed at this point. I do believe, though, that we need to look at what USAID, through the very recent program that was exposed as a result to the tweeting and the USAID efforts to really, as USAID says, provide a level of communication to the Cuban people. But the Cuban people, of course, and the Cuban government saw this as method to further destabilize the country. So this is what we have to deal with. But the reason why we're having such difficulty is because we don't have better relations and normal relations between our two countries. Andrea, every public opinion poll has shown that the American public wants this embargo to end. We have many issues with Cuba, but how do you address these issues if you're not in the process of negotiating? This embargo has been in place for over 55 years, and until that is resolved, you're going to see all kinds of issues crop up that's really going to be very, very, I think, dangerous for both countries. And so the recent Twitter program is an example of what USAID has done throughout the world under the guise of democracy promotion, which that's what our government does. But I think it's very important to understand that when people are engaged in this work, we have a responsibility and a duty to make sure that they're protected and that they're not put at risk and they're not in danger. And the only way we can do this is to insist on negotiations with no preconditions so that we can move both countries forward in a semblance of normalcy and peace. People in America, our citizens, deserve the right to travel to Cuba whenever they want, just like they can travel to Vietnam and to China.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, just back from Cuba, I should point out. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.